Yeah, no, that's fine. We're relaxed here.
Good seeing you, Sylvia.
So you just let them know, Nikita, when you're ready.
I'm ready whenever you are. Yeah.
Great. All right, let's begin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome everyone. I want to thank you all for being here today, for our guest speaker who has generously given his time to come here and speak to the Metis community here at the University of Manitoba. To introduce myself, my name is Brad Boudreau. I am the chair of the MF Bison Local here at the University of Manitoba. To my left is our vice chair, Jenna Vando. And to my right is our Secretary-Treasurer, Laura Forsyth. Here today to introduce our guest speaker. He is coming here on behalf of the Manitoba Métis Federation, the democratically elected government of the Manitoba Métis community. It is my honor and my privilege to have known this individual for a number of years, and I'm very grateful that he was able to come here and share his experience and to talk about the recent Métis Homeland map that was passed at the special sitting of the Métis Nation General Assembly. Without further ado, I would like to introduce currently the Minister of Housing for the Métis government, Mr. Will Goodon.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Brad. And thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity to come out here and speak at the university. I think this is my second time I was able to come out here. For me, it's a big honor to be able to come out here. I think that the people who are here are not just going to be, we talk about the youth being the leaders of tomorrow, blah, 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 but I think that the actual facts is that the people who are here today and taking classes and learning about the Métis are the people who are making a difference today. Because you are talking about how we are, what we are, who we were, what the Métis Nation is, and I'm hoping to get into that a little bit here, but I just wanted to say thank you to Brad, thank you to the Bison Local, thank you to the Indigenous Student Center for having us here and for the venue. I like this venue because for me, I've had the opportunity to speak to Métis citizens, about Métis citizens. I like this venue because it's much more relaxing. It's I'm not up at the front looking at you and you're all looking at me. We're all in this together. So I like that type of venue. And I'm hoping today to be able to have some interaction. Last time I was here, I don't remember what topic we were talking about. What were we talking about?
It was right after the announcements.
It was about the land claims, about the interim temporary measures, not the actual ones, but the interim ones between Canada and MMF. So what I was hoping to do is have a little bit of a opening remarks. I thought I would just throw a few things out there and provide some context, really hoping that there could be some questions that we can talk about here today, that we can have some back and forth. So I got some help putting together some speaking notes, and it's like 6, 7, 8 pages long, so I won't go through that. But I just thought I'd do a little bit of background on myself real quickly here. So I am now the Minister of Housing and Property Management for the Manitoba Métis Federation. I have been with the Manitoba Métis Federation since 1996. And I look back now and I think, where did all that time go? Because that's going to be 23 years now. And I think I was only 26 I was only 12 when I started. I'm just kidding. But it's in that time, I have learned a lot. And one of the things that I did learn was to listen to people who have been there and who have been the leaders of the past and who were the leaders at that time. And I honestly, this is very honestly true, am feel that it was an honor for me to sit and listen to people like Senator Ed, when I was a kid, Yvonne Dumont is actually married to my first cousin, so I knew Yvonne when I was just really little. He used to keep his horses at our house, and we used to go riding together. So learning from those kinds of people was of great importance to me, but I didn't see it at the time. But then obviously, being able to grow and watch and learn from President David Chartrand, who I think, and I don't know, this is going live here, so I gotta be careful. I think he's one of the greatest Métis leaders that we've had in a heck of a long time. That he has, obviously there's people around him, and he has brought really good people around him to be able to accomplish what he has. But he has brought the Métis Nation to a place where we have hardly ever been before, probably not for 150 years at least. That's another story. In 2020, we're going to be celebrating 150 years of the Métis Nation joining Confederation. So, but that being said, I do have a tendency to ramble a little bit, so Brad's here to kind of kick me under the table if I go off too far one way or the other. But I thought maybe we would talk a little bit about why we're here, and that's in regards to the Homeland map. So at the last Métis National Council General Assembly, and it was in Winnipeg, we had quite a bit of discussion, and things had been percolating for quite some time. And there was a few issues of why this happened, but just to say that we had quite a bit of work happen beforehand. Let's take one of those so I know what I'm talking about. So we had quite a bit of work done beforehand for the year or two before that. I had been fortunate to sit in on some of those small group committees that were having the discussions, doing the research. So the Homeland Map resolution was introduced. I felt very proud to be able to say that I seconded the map resolution. But I also want to say that this map isn't new. It's not something that was dreamed up and we just scribbled on the map of Canada in November that this is where the Métis are, and this is Clement Chartier, President of Métis National Council, makes an edict and he says this is where the Métis Nation homeland is. But this has been this is a map of that was done with research, with political, social, economic considerations, but basically it's a map of where the Métis Nation is. There's obviously people who disagree. There's one of the things I look at in politics is if there's people on both sides of the issue who are mad at you, then you're probably somewhere close to the middle, right? So we've got people out east in Nova Scotia who are absolutely mad, and we've got people who say that we went too far. So we're somewhere in the middle here, and but I don't think that was the reason why we did the map. We did the map for a few reasons with regards to what's going on out there. But I think it was time, but it was past time. It was something that should have been done a long time ago. And in fact, back in 1983, when the Métis National Council first started, and I don't have it in front of me, but I could probably get it, find it somewhere. I should probably have that at my fingers. Is this map is very, very close to what was suggested back in 1983, and some of the things that you want to look at when we're looking at the map. I'm going on my notes here at all here. Is the geography of the country, is the way the Métis use the land, and obviously geography is a big part of that. So you'll notice obviously that it kind of flows along the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. Well, that's because the Métis were fur traders and buffalo hunters primarily, right? And then all of the services that surrounded those occupations. So did the buffalo go into the Rocky Mountains? Not too often, but they went up to the Rocky Mountains. So that's where the Métis would go to hunt with their big community hunts. And if you notice, a lot of the areas that it goes up into towards Churchill, into the Northwest Territories, those areas are obviously fur trading areas where they followed the rivers and where the fur trading posts were. And the buffalo hunts supported the fur trading and vice versa. So it was like one of the things that the Métis have always been described as is entrepreneurs. That we looked at what was there. We built things like the Red River Card for economic purposes, so that we could take the buffalo hides or the pemmican or the furs that were traded and move them across great distances from across the whole prairies of Canada and northwestern United States, northwestern United States. So those economic reasons were a big part of how we use the land. One of the things that I had heard when this map first came out was that, well, what about the First Nations who were there? Like some people said, well, by putting this map out, you're basically saying that all the treaty areas where the First Nations signed the treaties, that you're claiming that territory. Well, one of the things that I would say in response to that is that before Canada became Canada, before there was effective control in this part of North America by the European powers, we didn't have borders. We didn't have the 49th parallel, or Manitoba or Saskatchewan or Alberta. People used the land. When we were out there, the Plains Cree were with us, the Ojibwe, the Dakota people, who we had a couple battles with, but then we signed a treaty with them. Sorry, getting a little carried away here. So it wasn't a all or nothing. So here's the Métis over here and this section of land, and then there's a border and the Dakota over here, and we didn't go on each other's land, or the Cree, or even if you took the Métis out of everything, the Cree and the Dakota used the same land too. So there was a multiple use of the land. So there was a sharing of the land. Yeah, we had some fights out there. That's part of who we are. That's part of like who we are as a people. The Métis, I don't know if you noticed lately, but even when the premiers makes a few moves against us, we have a tendency to want to go out and have a little fight. But so we're not afraid of dropping the gloves. Sorry. But we're also not afraid of working with people, and that's what we did. When the Métis Nation was first being formed, is that yes, we were distinct, and there's no doubt about that. One of the things, I think there's the distinction of the language, the Michif language, the distinction of our food, of our clothing. You look at the, Métis beadwork when you see it with the flower motifs that's on the Métis beadwork, the sash, the music, the dance, All those things are markers of the people. So there's there's no doubt that we are a people and a nation. One of the other things that that I had heard over social media and in other areas is that, and this is actually a very important issue. It's bigger than the map as far as I'm concerned, is the idea of who the Metis are. And whether, because even amongst our own people, and I think we need to have a really good conversation amongst ourselves, is the idea that we're only Métis because we're mixed. I wrote an article for Red Rising magazine, which should be coming out soon, I think. And in that article, the title is Métis are not mixed. We're not Métis because we're mixed. We're Métis because we're a distinct people. We're a nation because we're a distinct people. And the word Métis back in the 1700s might have meant mixed, but language changes. There's words. There's words out there in the English language today that are used, you know, in the 21st century that 50 years ago meant something completely different, and a lot of them are not good words, but they mean something different today than they meant 50 years ago. So if a word means, if words can change like that in 50 years, then over 200-300 years, the understanding of what a word is can definitely change. I apologize for my cough here. So I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit here. So I'm going to stop now, and because there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about here, but I'd rather have a conversation than to have just a talk and just have you listen to me ramble, because I do have ramble and go all over the place here. So I'm hoping that there's some questions, and that I can that we can have a conversation, because I think that's a much better way of getting at what's really getting at people and what they want to know and what they want to hear and what they want to understand. So I'm just going to open the floor, if that's okay.
You know, that's a really simple question that I know the answer to, but I want everyone to know the answer to. Is that, so when we look at the map, is this map saying that only the individuals who live within the blue are Métis?
That's a good question. So the map tells you where the historic Métis Nation was. It tells you where the historic Métis Nation is. If there's somebody whose parents grew up in a Métis community, let's say Duck Bay, Manitoba, and they moved to Toronto for school, and they stayed out in Toronto and have jobs out there, they're Métis. One of the things that we want to be careful of, and while we did the map, is that there's people who, I'm going to use another example, Vancouver Island. There's people who feel that because they are Métis, and they are, because they're from Saskatchewan, a Métis community in Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, or Alberta, and they moved out to Vancouver Island, but their parents moved out to Vancouver Island, so now they're living out there in Vancouver Island, and they're Métis. But they're Métis, they live in Vancouver Island, so Vancouver Island must be Métis. Those things don't exactly work together. As you can tell from the map, Vancouver Island is quite a long ways from where the Homeland stops. And I do have quite extensive conversations with my colleagues who live on Vancouver Island and who are Métis and who are part of the Métis Nation government in British Columbia. There's a, oh, thank you. No. Simpsons, okay. So there's that misunderstanding, I think it is that because I'm Métis and I live in Vancouver Island is Métis. So there's a big misunderstanding there. So I think we can say that if your family tree, if your family is linked to the homeland, that is not the only indicator to say that you're Métis, but it's a pretty big one, so it really helps. Anyone else?
I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about Ontario.
Yeah, so that was a few questions that came up, and there's a big one I'm sure that everybody's going to ask is the Powleys won Métis rights in Sault Ste. Marie, and how come Sault Ste. Marie isn't in the Métis homeland? Because that's the first case that went to the Supreme Court. They won Métis rights. And why does the homeland exclude the Powleys? One of the things that I have been able to, I think, wrap my head around is the idea that the decision that the Supreme Court made about the Powleys is very helpful when it comes to Métis Nation rights. And I'm just going to use another example with the Daniels case. So there's a couple of cases that have to do with Métis rights, and then the MMF is the third one. The MMF one is very tight and very good because we we had much more control over what was argued in front of the courts on the MMF case, not so much on Ontario with Powley or Daniels. So these cases are mostly helpful, but also have a little bit of confusion in there as well. If you were to look at the transcripts from the Powley case, from the evidence, you will see that most of the elders or community people who testified, including the Powleys, a very limited understanding of Métis culture, Métis nationhood, Métis citizenship. They talk about being Métis as being part of the First Nations. So their culture goes back to their grandparents who were either non-status or status, and that's how they connect to their Métis citizenship. And what we've been finding out in the last few years is, and what I said earlier, is that being mixed isn't being Métis. That understanding has, I think, been gaining precedence in the last 10-15 years. But let's go back to the evidence in the Powley case. The president of the Métis Nation of Ontario at the time, Tony Belcourt, he also testified that for his purposes, being president, that as long as you had some Aboriginal ancestry, and it could be Métis ancestry, or it could be First Nations ancestry, or it could be Inuit ancestry, that would be sufficient for him to say that you're a Métis citizen in Ontario. So we see some big problems coming out of the evidence in Powley. Even though, as I said, Powley gave us the principles for what we needed to do out here. For my case, we obviously used the principles and the legal arguments from the Powley decision at the Supreme Court. And I know it's very difficult to sort of wrap your head around it. The principles from Powley apply to Métis rights. Powley was probably not Métis. So the courts, although they do their very best, they don't get absolutely everything right. So that's what's going on in Ontario. Now then, Ontario also, in the last, I think, 3 or 4 years, has done something else that is problematic, and that's they recognize these new, historic Métis communities. So that if you can trace your ancestry to a community, then that makes you a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario. That is quite a opposite and contradictory understanding of nationhood as far as I'm concerned. So nationhood, with respect to the Métis Nation, we're all related to each other. Like when I was in Saskatchewan at a meeting last fall, I was sitting beside one of the elders, and he's from northern Saskatchewan. And we were talking, a nice guy, and pretty soon we found out that we're related, because he's got relations that go to St. Francis, Gragtown, and so do I. So you'll find those connections if you are a Métis Nation citizen, but even if you're in Northwest Territories, we're all connected in some way, whether it's through community or through family, and usually it's through family. There's a family tree. It's usually only 3 or 4, or maybe 5 generations or separation that we can find each other. And I bet you all the Métis in this room, we could find that connection to each other. Now, so that makes us the Métis Nation. Now, the idea of, and I think Powley helps with this confusion as well, because the Powley case talks about community as being one of the most important things. We assert that nation is one of the most important things, and that the Métis Nation is the Métis Nation. We're not made up of 6 or 20 or 50 Métis communities. Now, the word community has a few different words here, a few different meanings as well. So community could be bricks and mortar, and it could be duck bait. Or community could be, let's say, the Mennonite community in Manitoba. Does that mean just Winkler, or does that mean all Mennonite people who live in Manitoba? So the idea of community is a stumbling block as far as I'm concerned as well, because but then the Métis Nation of Ontario hangs its hat really hard on Powley. So they take the word community and they make it regional, but it's still distinct and separate from the Métis Nation. So that they think that these communities, you add them all together and you have a nation. We say that the nation is whole unto itself, and yeah, we live in different communities in Duck Bay or Swan River or Isle of Cross, but this, Isle of Cross isn't, a national entity on its own. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining this very well, but there's a very, I think, a very fundamental difference between nationhood and an aggregate of communities. So that to me is a huge problem. Now there's lots of political issues happening in Ontario, and I think they're going to have to figure stuff out themselves. And the other, I'll get you in a sec. Sorry, I see your hand. The other thing that we did at the General Assembly was to put the Métis Nation of Ontario on probation to fix what their problems are, and that is that they have recognized the Métis Nation of Ontario citizens who are not actually connected to the Métis Nation. So there's a bit of a problem there as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so just kind of to Oh man, identity is so complex.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about this map and what you're kind of discussing. And there's not much of Ontario that's included in here.
Right.
And then I think about the MMF and how the MMF defines, or how citizens become a citizen in Manitoba of the MMF, and that's tracing back to roots in the River Valley to Scrip, right? So then I look at this Métis National Council, and I wonder, because it looks like maybe with this agreed upon territory that Ontario is excluded from being part of the Homeland, which would almost seem to me too that the Ontario Métis are not really being included as Métis by your own nation. Sorry, I'm not Métis.
Yeah.
I'm an Anishinaabe. It's a little bit more
Yeah,
clear
no
cut,
problem.
sort of, for me.
Yeah.
But then I think too about, okay, so you've got this definition in Manitoba, which seems to be a very strongly held notion, right? If you can go back to Scrip, you are definitely Métis, right? That's pretty hard, clear cut. What is the definition that the Métis National Council goes by that has drawn out this larger portion to include Alberta, Manitoba, or Alberta?
So back in 2002, and I can tell I'm getting old because I was there back in 2002. There was a decision made by all governing members, Ontario included, that they would have a definition of Métis Nation definition. And I'll just, because it's the same in every single governing member, including Ontario. They, after 2002, when the Métis National Council General Assembly passed and accepted the definition, every governing member went back and then changed theirs, like Manitoba went back and changed ours to be consistent, to be exactly the same as the Métis National Council definition. Saskatchewan did the same thing, Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. The problem with Ontario is that they didn't apply the same criteria when they did their definition. So their definition is the same, but they didn't apply the same criteria, and a lot of it has to do with the things that I talked to you about. With there were some political issues that happened there, and there was some different interpretations of what this definition would mean. It was maybe a little open-ended and was a little bit open for definition, but like I said, at the time, President Belcourt, even when the Powley case was being discussed, he said, as long as you have any Aboriginal ancestry, you're Métis. So that became a sort of an underlying principle of what Ontario did. I'm just going to go over to the other side of the Homeland for a minute, to British Columbia, because British Columbia had the same issues, because they obviously have, wherever you go, there's people who have mixed blood. And British Columbia had the same issue, and they had some similar political leadership back in the day that would have accepted anybody who had mixed blood. That's changed. Now if you go to British Columbia, they have one of the strictest, as strict as anybody from Ontario, from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. Their idea of who's Métis is exactly the same. So for the most part, the Métis Nation citizens who live in British Columbia, who are part of the Métis Nation BC government structure, they come from this area. So the president of the Métis Nation of British Columbia is from Saskatchewan. Her ministers are from the Homeland. There's a willingness on some of their parts to try to expand this map to go into British Columbia, but they need to provide evidence. They need to say this, there was a Métis community in, I don't know, I'm just gonna make it up, Kamloops. And this is, back in 1850, this is who was there. Well, I haven't seen that yet, and I don't think they brought it forward yet, but if that were the case, then we could look at that. So my point being is that British Columbia is made up of people who are Métis according to this definition that was passed in 2002. So, but Ontario, and I say this with the utmost respect for the leadership between 2002 and now, that there was obviously some reasons that where this didn't happen right away, but it didn't happen, and so now this seems more drastic than what it would have been if we would have enforced this back in 2004, 2005, 2006, and so the problem becomes is that these people who were registered in Ontario, in Mattawa, along the Mattawa River, which cuts between Ontario and Quebec, these people have been told they're Métis by the Métis Nation of Ontario for 15, 20 years now. So their identity for the last 15, 20 years has been that they're Métis. And now, Métis National Council, we're being elitist, we're coming in and saying, you're not who you think you are. So how would they feel? How would they feel about this? They would feel like somebody is taking something away from them. And that is a terrible feeling. Somebody's taking away my identity. Like I didn't know that I was Métis, but now I know, and I've known it for the last 10, 15 years. I am Métis. I go to Métis Nation assemblies. I listen to the fiddle. I do all these things now. I wear the sash. I'm Métis now. And who's MNC to tell me I'm not? I know who I am. I think the problem goes back to the people who allowed them to think that they've been Métis all this time, because I think they did them a disservice by saying you are this culture, you come from this culture, when you actually didn't. And I think that is where the fault lies, is that the folks who allowed that thinking to take place, who, because they wanted to, I'll say it, they wanted to pump up the numbers of Métis people living in Ontario so that they could be a more powerful political force. All of a sudden, instead of having 5,000 Métis who live in the Kenora and area, Rainy River, you've got 50,000 right across the province. You're much more of a political force now, right? And I think that was a part of the issue. I blame the leadership at that time who didn't have the guts to follow the actual definition that was brought in 2002 and that they signed off on at that time as well. So I think there's a lot of political blame to go around on this one, that it wasn't done properly at that time.
For those that don't know in the room, can you just read out what the actual definition
Sure.
is?
So the 2002 Métis Nation definition of Métis. Métis means a person who self-identifies as Métis, is of historic Métis Nation ancestry, and is accepted by the Métis Nation through the acceptance process. Historic Métis Nation means the Aboriginal people then known as Métis or half-breeds who resided in the historic Métis Nation homeland. Historic Métis Nation homeland means the area of land in west central North America used and occupied as the traditional territory of the Métis or half-breeds as they were then known. Métis Nation means the Aboriginal people descended from the historic Métis Nation, which is now comprised of all Métis Nation citizens and is one of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada within Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982. Distinct from other Aboriginal peoples means distinct for cultural and nationhood purposes. So that, I think, goes well with a couple of my assertions, and I've done this on social media in the last week or so, is that Métis citizens today are descendants of Métis citizens in history. We're not Métis because we have Cree blood or Ojibwe blood or Dakota and mixed with French and Scottish. We're Métis because, and now, don't get me wrong, there was a genesis of the Métis Nation, absolutely. But then there was the Métis Nation was there. Like we are descended from the Métis Nation citizens, so that's what makes us Métis, not the fact that we're mixed, which is a big issue with the folks out in Nova Scotia in particular, and Quebec as well, although there's other areas that are really asserting themselves, is that they have found one Indigenous ancestor from the 1600s. And almost all of them have that one ancestor from the 1600s, so they're all related to each other from about 10 generations ago. Now they're Métis. One of the things that I was able to pick out is, I can't remember which province it was in. It was Quebec or Nova Scotia or New Brunswick or something. There was one of the Métis groups that's out there today. I think it's the Métis Nation of the Rising Sun. Yeah, so they, I guess there was a few hunters that were sitting around the campfire one night, and they were pissed off. At that time, I think it was the Nova Scotia government and the Mi'kmaq governments had signed an accord to protect the moose because there was the moose were being, they were threatened at the time. So obviously there's a hierarchy of use of wildlife in Canada, you know, like if there's enough moose, then there's sport hunting, and but Aboriginal rights is right at the top, and that's the last one that if there's a at-risk species, that's the last user that gets cut off, is Indigenous rights holders. But these hunters were sitting around and they were upset that the Mi'kmaq people were still being allowed to hunt, even though all of their hunting rights had been cut off, their license systems. So I guess they were sitting around, they said, well, we should all be Métis, because I bet you all of you could find a Aboriginal ancestor in your family tree. And they're all like, yeah, let's all become Métis. That's how it started, because they were trying to fight against Indigenous rights in their area. So all of a sudden, becoming Métis was a way to fight against the Indigenous people who lived on that land. And that really, really ticks me off, because that is the height of colonialism, is to actually not just take the lands, take the use of the lands, but to actually take the identity of an Aboriginal people to fight against another Aboriginal people. That just absolutely drives me bonkers. And they can argue against it and say, no, we've always been a community, but we're in hiding. Well, you're in hiding for 300 years. Like, I don't know how long, 1982 you came out, all of a sudden you're not hiding anymore. I wonder what happened in 1982. So anyways, those people drive me nuts. So I apologize.
Daryl LaRue is going to be coming from out east to come
Okay.
speak about that on March 7th.
March 7th?
Yeah,
Oh, I
March
would love to
7th.
come, yeah.
And he was at the MNC gathering as
Yeah.
well, and he talked a little bit about, and his talk will be called the Self-Made Métis.
Okay, good. Okay, I'll put it in my calendar. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
This is kind of off topic, but I was wondering if there were a lot of situations where status men married a Métis woman, so the woman would be status and then all the kids would be, and the Métis identity is kind of lost. Because I feel like this is what happened with my family. my mom and all of her siblings are status because of her dad, and
Okay.
they have all these benefits from being status,
Right.
and they all self-identify as Cree, and now I'm the first one to identify as Métis.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and there's, you'll find, especially in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, but also in Alberta, that a lot of our communities are right beside a First Nations community. So, obviously, what you do when you go out to parties, you hang out with people, and pretty soon you're married, and you're having families, and you have kids, right? And so there'll be, one parent will be Métis, and the other parent will be First Nations. Back when, before we started having our rights recognized by the courts, everybody thought that the Métis had no rights. They couldn't hunt, they couldn't get an education, they couldn't get medical help in any way, eyeglasses, etc. So for a lot of people who were able to, decided to take their status. But they were raised, like one parent was First Nation, one parent was Métis. So the parent who was Métis raised the kids with the Métis culture, with the fiddle, the square dance, teaching them, sometimes teaching them Michif language. So they, culturally, part of them was Métis, but they wouldn't have that same, but because of our constitution, where we say that you can't be both, and then there's also a Supreme Court case out of Alberta, the Cunningham case, where the courts have said you can't get the rights and privileges of being both Métis and being status First Nation. So there's a wall there where if let's say your parents registered you when you were just an infant to be First Nation, you can't now come over and register to be Métis. That is a big problem, and there's a lot of people who chose to, because they had their mother or their grandmother lost their status, that they were then able to get their status. There's a lot of people out there who today, after we won our hunting rights, after we pushed forward on a lot of things, and I give credit to my president for pushing us to where we are today. People want to come over and be Métis again. So, but there is a legal problem there, and I think it's all with the government of Canada. And it's inside the Indian Act. I'm not exactly sure how the mechanism works, that you cannot legally give up your First Nation status. That you can't say, I want to be Métis now, I want to register as Métis, even though that's who your mom was or that's who your dad was. You can't do that because of some mechanism that's at the government of Canada. I think that someday this is going to be a legal challenge at some point. I think there's going to be somebody out there who's going to say, I know who I am. My mom was Métis, and I grew up being Métis. I play the fiddle, I dance the jig, I do this and I do that, and I want to be Métis. And I think there's going to be a legal challenge at some point, and I think that whoever does that is going to win. But I think it's going to have to be a fairly substantial undertaking to do that. It's going to have to be supported by the Métis governments. I don't know if that answers your question, but it is an issue. It's definitely an issue out there today, and has been for quite a while since Bill C-31 came in and people started taking their status. Most people are good there, but some people want to come back and they can't.
I have a question.
Yeah.
One concern that I've heard echoed among my friends, especially my First Nation friends, is a fear that this new map was published in order to pursue land claims in these Western Prairie provinces, Saskatchewan, Alberta, also BC, Northwest Territories. Could you clarify if this is the case or not?
Right, so land claims and use of the land, I think, are completely different things in my opinion. Now, if the Métis were to claim all that land as a land claim, that would be just like, I don't know, like way out there.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just go back to our land claims case, even though the MMF land claims case isn't really a land claim. It was a case that said Canada didn't do its duty to the Métis children who were supposed to be given 1.4 million acres of land in Manitoba. So that 1.4 million acres of land would have, there's economic opportunities that come with that land. So the economic opportunities, the head start, as our president likes to talk about, would have been there for those children at that time. That would be more of a land claim. And I think the idea of a homeland is much different than a land claim. I don't think that we would say we're going to take over Winnipeg or Calgary or Edmonton, and we're going to take that and again at the exclusion of other Indigenous peoples who are also on the land. That being said, the use of the land also comes with certain rights and responsibilities for us. And you know, one of the examples that I'll use is the Belcourt 3 that came through our territory. It also came through a couple of the First Nations territories. Well, then we go back to the duty to consult. So who does the Crown have to consult with? They have to consult with both the First Nation and the Métis people who use that land. So I think that is more along the lines of where the use of the land would come into play. So if you know, we have Métis people who live in northern Alberta in the oil sands area. So if there's going to be construction in their territories, the Crown would have to consult with both the First Nations who are there and the Métis communities who are there. So it's not, you know, land claim is it's a very specific thing that I think can be talked about. The use of the land is much more different, because then I think you would have to ask those people who are asking that question, is the reserve land the only land that they have control over? And they would say no, because we use the land in these other areas. Well, that is very similar to ours. So I hope that helps. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, I'm going along pretty quick. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
I have one more.
Sure.
So my question is about BC. I hear what you're saying about the people who are in the leadership positions now are from the Homeland. But given the kin ties between Red River and BC, particularly in the fur trade in the 19th century, I'm just wondering how that was factored into deciding to exclude BC.
Well, one of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this because it's in most of the harvesting hunting cases, is the dates of effective control. So when the fur trade was happening throughout the prairie provinces, the effective control was the Indigenous nations who lived out here. So the European control didn't happen until after, you know, in some areas, I think in Northwest Territories, they talk about 1921, I think as being one of the dates that they use up there. So part of the issue with British Columbia is that access is a huge issue. You've got mountains there, and you're not just gonna like pop over the mountains. Now, people did travel, but were communities established, and were they Métis communities established before the European control happened? Because if you remember, British Columbia was a province, before the rest of the prairies were part of Canada, and it was John A. Macdonald's plan to connect all that, and that's why he sent his army out to fight us, and we had to say, no, that's just, you're gonna stop there, and St. Margaret, where's St. Margaret, just over here? Yeah. But British Columbia, again, there are some communities that may be able to provide some evidence that they were a part of the Métis Nation, and there was definitely Métis people who traveled through there. But I guess one of the questions that we ask is, was that Métis person by himself or herself, or did they actually, was them being there enough to make that whole territory part of the Métis homeland? So that those questions haven't been answered yet, I don't think, and I think that's it's going to be difficult, I think, for them to answer that. Although I don't see it as being impossible. It's just I think we do learn more all the time, and I think our understanding of Métis nationhood has changed in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years, in the last 50 years. It's you know, the Métis nation hasn't changed, but just our understanding of nationhood, of being a people, that understanding has changed quite substantially, and that definition was a huge step. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a big thing in 2002 that really, I think it gives a lot of credibility to what we've done since then. So, I don't know, hopefully that helps.
I just have one more question
Okay.
before we wrap up. You talked about consultation between the Crown and Indigenous peoples, but one of them, and perhaps you would like to elaborate on consultation between Indigenous nations. With some of the commentary that I've been hearing online is that there seems to be a misconception that there's some sort of hierarchy of rights within Indigenous nations, particularly that First Nations rights supersede the rights of the Métis Nation.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and you know, one of the first things I'll point to is the Constitution. And although Section 35 says that the Aboriginal peoples in Canada include Indians, Inuit, and Métis, I don't think it puts them in any order because of their hierarchy in the rights structure, Section 35 rights structure. And in fact, I would like to point to a fellow by the name of Tom Isaac. And Tom Isaac has, he was appointed as the Minister's Special Representative to look at Métis rights. And he's a very well-known and very, his credentials as an Aboriginal rights lawyer are very, very high. He's one of the most respected, I think, in Canada. And he has specifically said that there is no hierarchy of rights. And he's also specifically said that there is no law that talks about a hierarchy of rights. There's no court decisions. There's no constitutional amendments. There's no understanding in law anywhere that says these Indigenous rights are supersede these Indigenous rights, and whether it's First Nations or Métis or Inuit. And that, you know, there was a article in the Winnipeg Free Press, not an article, but an opinion in the Winnipeg Free Press a couple of weeks ago that kind of alluded to that said that that the Métis Nation needs to ask permission from First Nations in order to exercise our rights or to be a nation even. That basically we were just sort of hangers on, and you know, I don't want to be derogatory to have so many friends who are in First Nations leadership, but this one opinion I think was very wrong and not helpful at all. And I think that we need to be working together. And I think for the most part, 99.9% of Métis citizens and First Nations citizens want to do that. But I think that, there's a genuine misunderstanding out there, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, oh, you're only half Indigenous, so you only get half the rights. So I think that's a huge misunderstanding and comprehension. And the person who wrote that opinion piece is a lawyer. He should know better. I think it stirs up emotional feelings rather than actually works positively to have an understanding of what the law really is out there. So it's very clear. There is no hierarchy of Aboriginal rights in the Constitution. So anyways, thanks very much for that question. I appreciate that.
Well, with that, I would like to thank you, Minister Goodon, for coming here to attend, and we also have a gift for you,
Oh, my.
as is custom with
Thank you.
our community custom and our traditions.
Not just Tic Tacs.
Not just Tic Tacs.
This is great. Thank you
So
very
if y'all
much.
give
I
a
appreciate
warm
that.
round of applause for Minister Goodon. Thank you for joining us.